Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about something that strength athletes in general need to think about, and that is that many lifters out there just simply do not do enough high rep work. They don't do enough stuff of 10 to 20 reps, and oftentimes the reasons for it seem reasonable, but they really aren't. And some of it has to do with the fact that obviously when you lift heavier, we get better strength carryover on our big lifts, right? More tension generally equals better intramuscular coordination and everything else, and a lot of other factors. But what they need to think about is things like stimulus versus fatigue, overall hypertrophy, sometimes the thickness of support muscles without considerations for maximizing the strength of those muscles. And the latter is one of those that a lot of people don't think about, and it might be something that say, nope, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to put on useless muscle. But you need to understand that there is no such thing as useless muscle. So first of all, let's come over to the first point. Yes, to get really strong, you have to lift heavy. There are a lot of factors involved with hitting max lifts. But what you need to factor in is that if you are already doing heavy work, and I mean really heavy work, you're not really going to get the same benefits from doing a bunch of 5 rep sets and 4 rep sets and things like that as you think you will. In other words, someone who's already hitting max lifts or even heavy doubles or triples, you're already getting the strength benefits, because what you need to remember is that a lot of times what we think of as strength has to do with intramuscular coordination. It has to do with things like that. And it has to do with learning to lift really heavy. Well, the form that you use for a heavy 5 rep set is not going to be the same technique that you have to use on a max. And that's the thing that people have to remember. Okay? Your practice work, if you're proficient already and you know how to perform an exercise and the skill is down, no amount of practice work with 5 rep sets is going to improve your skill. Okay, because you're not replicating your 1 rep max technique anyways. The bar path is going to be slightly different. Your setup's going to be different. And it's damn sure not going to be the same after the first rep. Even if you get it perfect on the first rep in a set, the subsequent reps are not going to look anything like it. So you're not even ingraining the same technique as your max effort lift. And I'm not talking about novices. Novices need skill work. They need to spend hours and hours and hours practicing the basics. Right? They need to learn how to squat and bench press and deadlift. The more advanced lifter doesn't need any of that. You already know how to perform these lifts. And doing a bunch of 5s and 4s and 6s is not going to teach you the skill on these movements any further. Right? Most of our big lifts are not the Olympic lifts that have a high technical component. They just aren't. And if you're already doing really heavy work, you're already getting the benefits. So usually all of our supplemental work and other stuff we're doing outside of that is there for the purposes of hypertrophy, because a bigger muscle has more strength potential. And I think that's a better way to put it, rather than when we say a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. Well, that's not true. A bigger muscle will always contract harder. When you contract it maximally, that's true. But that's not the same as being stronger. You have to coordinate it. Okay? You have to coordinate it. So I think the better way to put it is a bigger muscle has more strength potential in any given individual person. Now, when we make that statement, we now eliminate all the exceptions to the rule, right? Every single exception to the rule on the face of the earth just got removed. That's it. There are now no exceptions to that rule. So, a bigger muscle has more strength potential in an individual person. So everything else we're doing is for hypertrophy. And here's what I want you to think about with that. If you're doing 10 rep sets to build those muscles instead of doing 5s and everything else, think of it in terms of recovery. Think of it in terms of time. Because how long does it take you to do a 5x5? Let's say you're resting 3 minutes between sets. You've got to have 2 extra breaks versus doing a 3x10. Well, if we look at the various data we have out there, If rate of perceived exertion is similar or reps in reserve are similar, I don't care whether you took them to failure or you have 2 reps in reserve. 5x5 is going to produce very, very similar hypertrophy if at the same intensity level relative to your rep range as a 3x10. Which one's going to get you out of the gym faster? 3x10. You two less breaks. You're literally adding 6 minutes of extra break time to get the same amount of hypertrophy. Now, people will say, but you're getting more tension on the bar, so it might carry over better to max strength. Well, if you're already doing really heavy work, and 5x5 is not heavy. Okay, I want to make that point clear. If you can do 5 sets of 5 with a weight, that weight is not heavy for you. It's a moderate weight. But if you're already doing really heavy work, no, you're not going to see any strength carryover. You're not going to see any at all. There can be exceptions for certain joint angle specific work that you might do. There can be exceptions, but as a general rule, you're probably not going to see any benefit at all. In other words, if you're already doing the max effort system and you take a supplemental lift and you do a 5x5 versus a 3x10, you're probably going to get more out of the 3x10. Why? You get just as much hypertrophy. It's slightly easier on your joints and easier to recover from, just a small amount. You're going to recover a hair quicker. I'm not saying you can't do some 5x5s at that point, but you'd be better off doing more 3x10s with the same training slot. And then what else? You're out of the gym faster. Shaved 6 minutes off your workout for the same amount of muscle, slightly better recovery. Okay? It makes sense to do it, guys. It makes a hell of a lot of sense. Come back over to the point. This is why the conjugate system breaks these things down. Our heavy work should be truly heavy. Our speed work should be truly explosive. And our repetition work should be metabolically fatiguing. Okay? Make sense? Now, let's come over to things like upper back. All right, we have a lot of muscles that we don't care about them performing the lift. In other words, look at me doing these inverted rows. You think I care that I'm doing 15 to 20 rep sets? People say, well, you might be getting some useless hypertrophy there. Well, some. Okay, and that's a hypothesis that's postulated. There's some data to support it. There's some data to show that it may not be true. But in general, most hypertrophy, all hypertrophy will cause some increases in strength. So if you gain a bunch of muscle doing 20 rep sets, your strength will increase in those muscles to some extent under any hypothesis that we have. Whether it's 100% of strength potential is the subjective part. You're still going to get a stronger upper back doing this. But here's the question I would ask you. Do we use the muscles of this as primary movers on any of our big lifts? Not really. They're support muscles. Okay? They're support muscles. Okay, some of them are going to be used isometrically very seriously on the deadlift, sure. These are support muscles. They help us build a shelf to put the bar on to squat. They help us create stability. They help us create stability on the bench press. Do we care about them being able to contribute as primary movers to the 1 rep max? Not really. They're all held isometrically or as stabilizer muscles. Well, at that point, why don't we just want them to be big? We just need a base to have. The same thing, look at the bicep. Do we use the bicep as a primary mover, really? On any of our big lifts? Not really. It's a phenomenal stabilizer, and in fact, it can be a cushion to press against on the bench press. Well, at that point, any bicep, even if your bicep was just full of a pound of fat inside of each bicep with no extra muscle, wouldn't that help the bench press the same? Yeah. Does it have to be contractile proteins? No. The bigger arm in general gives you something to compress against at the bottom of the bench press. It doesn't matter how strong it is. So the thing to think about with some of these other movements is, are we just putting size where we need it for support? Well, if that's the case, we don't need to spend a lot of time worrying about that. We can just do small movements that we throw lots of volume at. And even if we get into some of this non-effective hypertrophy hypothesis, whether it's transient storage factors, inflammation, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy versus myofibrillar. If these are areas that we just need to get bigger and thicker, get them bigger and thicker. Okay? And if it's easier to recover from and easier to set up on a movement that you're doing sets of 15, why wouldn't you just do that? I'm talking about inverted rows, face pulls, bicep work, stuff like that. Just food for thought. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.